log on as we get going. So welcome to everybody for joining us today. This is the Ukraine-Britain Business Seminar on supply chain assurance in Ukraine. And we have some absolutely fabulous speakers today, to whom I'm very grateful. Just to say, we have Alexander McWorter, who's the Chief Executive of Citibank Ukraine. We have Yaroslav Petrov from Asters. We have Ihor Olekhov, who's from CMS Ukraine. We have Tony Chattin, who's a partner of MSS Global, and Simon Cassey from Burns and Wilcox. So it's quite a financial group here, but I suspect we'll be verging into non-financial areas as well. So just to explain the Ukraine-Britain Business Council, we have a very interesting schedule for this year, to which you might be interested. We hope to have at least a webinar a month, and next month is on virtual internships and capacitizing young people in Ukraine, and we might have one on security in March. We've also got a reception on the 12th of March in the House of Lords, to which a number of people will be invited, obviously members, and we have 2 trade visits lined up for Kyiv, most likely Kyiv, during this year. So, and possibly a conference in the autumn, which we're working on at the moment. So a few things just to be going on with. We are a member-driven organization, so we have a number of members speaking with us today, and I'm also grateful to those that aren't members. As you know, there's likely to be a lot of investment in Ukraine in the coming years when there's a ceasefire in particular, and the Americans have spoken about an £800 billion fund, let alone whatever's coming from Europe. So at this stage, it's going to be very important to understand where the money's going, how it's verified for the investors, how it's going to be protected, how it's going to be de-risked. And obviously there's financial risks that need to be covered and controlled, as well as operational risks with partners on delivery. So we hope to hear a bit about both of these aspects from the speakers. And I'd very much like to start with Alexander McWorter from Citibank Ukraine, who are obviously on the banking side of things, and therefore the company that everyone wants to talk to. So Alexander, I'd love to hear about your views of supply chain assurance and how you ensure that the money goes where it should do and does the right thing.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Ashley, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I guess maybe just a quick background on Citi in Ukraine for those of you who don't know. We've been on the ground for 27 years in Kyiv. I'm in Kyiv right now. We have power at the moment, which is great. We serve about 500 corporate clients. We don't have retail, but we serve multinationals. We serve Ukrainian clients, and we work with a number of the public sector enterprises here in Ukraine. And again, we're the only sort of global bank that's actually operating on the ground in Ukraine. And it's been, a great experience for us and a good business for Citi overall, an important part of our global network. I think just to maybe level set about sort of the operating environment in Ukraine, first of all. So I think what we've seen is the same way everyone has seen the resilience from the military and the Ukrainian people perspective, the business sector, the banking sector has shown that sort of same resilience. About 29% decline in GDP in 2022. And probably about this year, the economy will have fully recovered to pre-war levels in terms of GDP. We've seen growth every year since then, despite incredibly challenging conditions around electricity, around people issues, and around the other challenges that come from operating in a war around this here. That being said, the business continues to operate. We did a survey with AmSham Ukraine about a month ago. So in the middle of all of this, electricity outages and stuff like this. And out of the AmSham members, 90% of those companies are operating. 4 years into the full-scale invasion, 80% grew or maintained their business in 2025, and 90% of those companies are expected to grow or maintain their business in 2026. 68% of companies are operating at above pre-war levels, which is frankly an incredible statistic that I would never have expected, 4 years into a full-scale military conflict here. So the economy continues to perform, and we see that with our clients. Out of our 500 corporate clients, There's only 2 that are not operating, and that's because their facilities are in occupied territory. That is not to minimize the challenges, which are huge. Again, particularly around people issues with mobilization, with people, having evacuated, and frankly, the mental health toll that this has taken is a real challenge for all businesses that are operating here today, and it creates a lot of labor market issues. But the Ukrainians continue to adapt and continue to operate here. Now, everyone's obviously talking a bit about sort of post-war reconstruction, which is a massive opportunity. The World Bank estimate from a year ago was that it will take about $525 billion to reconstruct the country. That doesn't include things like replacing the railway gauges from Russian gauge to Western gauge. That's $100 billion. Or taking the grid for national security purposes into more dispersed, smaller generation. So it's less of a target on this here. And that doesn't include the fact too that, so that is a massive opportunity. But you also have Ukraine's domestic market, which was about 42 million people before the war, fast growing. Obviously, everyone's seen the resilience and the ability of Ukrainian engineers and others to adapt through this. So it's an attractive market. And it now seems to be firmly on the EU path, which again may take some time, but Ukraine is very committed to making the changes to get it there. And so there's a number of reasons investors are looking at Ukraine today that we are very, very interested in and working with many companies on. Now, Ukraine is a challenging place to do business, particularly during the war. It is a place, there are, like many emerging markets, it is a place where you need to know your clients, and we spend a significant amount of time diligencing our clients. We try and maintain sort of the highest standards about who we do business with, and that generally helps avoid, getting into issues. But you need to constantly monitor. You need to constantly engage and have a trusted network of advisors and others who understand the landscape and are able to guide people through who they can do business with here. Ukraine has made incredible strides against corruption. If you look about 10 years ago, if you look at the Transparency International corruption rankings, it was 142 out of 180 countries. Last year, it was 105 again. So that's a pretty significant increase. There's a lot more work to do, don't get me wrong. But Ukraine now ranks better than Brazil, than Mexico, than Turkey, and many other large emerging markets economies. So again, a lot more work to do, but it is a place you can navigate, if with your eyes wide open and engage with the right partners. There are tremendous opportunities, and many of our clients, like I said, have recovered at or above pre-war levels, even during the war, and post-war, whenever it happens, not soon enough. We are very optimistic that Ukraine will be, an economic powerhouse and be able to sort of drive growth and support Europe and the West going forward. Pause there.
Thank you very much, Alex. A couple of thoughts. Are there any sectors that maybe are more prone to, say, corruption or failure than others? Would you advise, where would you advise is cleaner and clearer?
I think there's there's certain sectors that do have sort of legacy vested interests, if you will, or large monopolies that are controlled by a single individual, often with political ties. And generally, what I would recommend is be eyes wide open about those sectors. There are ways to navigate those, but those will be more challenging than, say, the tech sector or the mil-tech sector or sectors where you don't have some of these legacy vested interests in here.
So avoid legacy. I mean, areas like agriculture, presumably okay. Manufacturing, where it's more diverse, perhaps. Is that your sense of it?
Yeah, look, I think every sector you need to do your diligence and be sort of eyes wide open on this. And I think there are pretty much every sector, there are very attractive opportunities, but some will require, more navigation and more understanding and deeper understanding of the nuances of the operating environment than others.
I understand you don't want to go into too much detail here, but the other thing is that was a lot of talk of this 800 billion American fund, which is coming to Ukraine. I mean, is that just talk at the moment? How real is that? What's your sense of that?
Yes, so we've been very engaged with DFC, who's leading this on the U.S. side, and Ukraine, the Ministry of Economy, and the PPP, who's driving this on the Ukrainian side of this. Now, there's the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Fund, which is put together and is up and running, or in the final stages of becoming up and running. That's functional. The ultimate size of that is not sort of finalized. At one point or another, the 100 billion number had been thrown out around that. Now there's discussions around this Ukraine prosperity plan with the U.S. that entails other things like a free trade zone and things like that have not been disclosed. That's where the $800 billion number is sort of coming from. So, but where I do have more visibility on is on the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Fund. I have been pleasantly surprised at how this has come together. I see great partnership with DFC, who is very engaged and has been in Kyiv many times, and is pushing hard to get this up and running, and on the Ukraine side. We see already some funding coming in for these. The website, the portal launched at the beginning of January for projects to be submitted. I'm aware of at least 3 projects that I do believe are bankable that have been submitted. I don't have visibility over the whole pipeline, but I do see some real opportunity here. Now, this fund will be investing in sort of the equity tranches, in critical minerals, in traditional energy and infrastructure, and there's talk of expanding that to other sectors. But this fund is actually up and running. They've appointed investment advisors. They are starting to review projects as they come in the pipeline. And so I am very optimistic that we'll start to see the first few investments of that fund in the next couple of months. We'll see what the ultimate size of this fund is, but this could be a very important vehicle. Now, one of the really important things that I don't think people appreciate is this fund is not just for American companies to invest in and to receive this. The U.S. side has been very clear. They are seeking to maximize the returns for both the U.S. and Ukraine. And if a French company or a UK company brings a project that meets the return hurdles or is attractive investment, and they are open to investing in that project. Obviously, the fund will not be open to those that have not supported Ukraine during the conflict. I would expect, Russia, Belarus, or even China or something like that, projects to be allowed in. But others, it could be a very viable funding source for British business who have good projects in these sectors that are looking to come into the country and seeking funding.
That's a very significant comment, and you've also been pretty optimistic on this, so we have to go with that. And thank you very much, Alex. It's really warming to hear that. If we could possibly now move to Ihor Olekhov from CMS Ukraine. Ihor, are you here?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Alex, for such a brilliant introduction of what is going on in the country and overall. I'm going to speak for a few minutes regarding more technical side, regarding the availability of supply chain finance and generally the resilience of financial instruments in Ukraine, which help to actually scale the business and make the business resilient in Ukraine. I have a very brief presentation regarding supply chain finance and the risks which currently the country is experiencing, and how we as lawyers at CMS are trying to address those challenges and find solutions. Well, first of all, obviously, because of the war and ongoing war and the risks which we face on a daily basis, you would think that supply chain finance would be actually non-existent in Ukraine, but it turns out that there is a huge interest from international organizations, IFIs, banks, insurers, and other development finance institutions to actually be engaged in Ukrainian projects, and particularly provide financing to Ukrainian businesses to first of all survive the war, and secondly expand to various markets, including export markets, and to ensure that the country functions well. And in supply chains, we also see this huge interest of international financial institutions primarily. We see that even IFC has developed its own supply chain finance model, which aims to support local suppliers and preserve critical supply chains. However, as always, in a country which is not which is facing such huge challenges, we see quite a number of constraints, and supply chain finance remains to a large extent unutilized. However, what we see from those frameworks is that even in such environments, it's possible to find solutions, legal solutions, which will minimize the risks and will ensure that Ukrainian suppliers receive financing sooner rather than later. What I mean here is that there is IFC initiative to actually drive these anchor-led structures where the financing is provided not on reliance on the supplier, but rather on the creditworthiness of the corporate buyer of the goods or services which are supplied from Ukraine. And this is especially important for structures relating to exports of goods or services from Ukraine, because although these risks are huge in Ukraine, if you rely on such anchor-led structures, you can still ensure that financing is available to your Ukrainian supplier, and at the same time, your risks will be manageable. And you will ensure that that these goods or services are duly shipped to you. Of course, we see also quite a number of attempts to adopt risk-sharing mechanisms from IFIs and development institutions, and now the insurance business is also starting to look into these instruments of risk-sharing and provide various instruments to support Ukrainian suppliers. And of course, all of this will not be able to function without digital platforms and data transparency. And we see quite a number of initiatives to make actually supply chain very transparent, very reliable, and include into this also the ESG standards on which my colleagues will speak later. Of course, Ukraine faces huge challenges in the business environment, in the geopolitical environment, and in the legal environment as well. One of the big challenges for cross-border trade, which we are constantly need to address, is the currency regulations and actually the need to adapt these structures for supply chain financing to the Ukrainian realities of foreign currency rules. Sometimes they are very strict, and sometimes they have limitations. They have strict periods of time when you need to pay, when the money needs to come into Ukraine. But overall, I would not say that all of these legal constraints which exist, they preclude supply chain finance instruments in Ukraine. On the contrary, there are already solutions which are developed in the market and which can be applied practically for any of such structures. And obviously, if you do not address those, it will be difficult to realize, but solutions can be found even in such environment. Of course, sanctions and compliance considerations, they are becoming more and more critical, especially in Ukraine, because Ukraine has adopted quite a number of sanctions against Russian business and Russian-controlled business, and this needs to be observed all the time. But at the same time, I need to say that a lot of these formalities which we had in the past, they are now simplified, and a lot of formalities are done via electronic signatures, via digital documents, and via other basically modern instruments, sometimes to the extent that you cannot imagine in other countries. Ukraine already applies this. Of course, contract enforceability remains a challenge because the judicial system is still under reform, and sometimes you see notorious cases in courts, but it's becoming less and less, I would say, widespread, and actually contracts are executed. And but this also needs to be taken into account when structuring your presence or providing supply chain finance in Ukraine. An important initiative which probably was discussed for over 10 years at various levels and among various stakeholders in Ukraine is a new law on factoring, which was adopted last year in July. And it will come into effect in July this year. It will provide greater certainty for assignments of contractual rights of receivables, and will create an electronic register of monetary claims. We did not have such register. In fact, in many countries, you do not even have even something closer to this electronic register, but Ukraine will be one of the first countries to introduce such registers, and this will provide legal certainty for receivables assignments, and obviously this will be a reliable register for providing financing and for higher market transparency and creating trust in the markets. Obviously, this moves Ukraine much closer to many European jurisdictions, and in many respects, as I say, it actually will be much more advanced once it is in place, much more advanced than in other countries with assignments and similar structures. Anchor-led structures in Ukrainian context, they are also very important because sometimes it's very difficult for Ukrainian suppliers to find local financing, or it may be very expensive to actually have such financing. But if you implement such anchor-led structure and adapt it to the local rules in Ukraine, first of all, you will significantly reduce the cost of financing and actually reduce the risks of such financing to actually the profile of international businesses which are buying from Ukraine. And I encourage everyone to think about this and to possibly discuss it with us, how you can actually implement such anchor-led structures in Ukrainian context to encourage more business to Ukraine. Obviously, we as legal counsel can help in structuring these supply chain finance instruments and ensure that they comply with the local rules and more importantly, ensure that the documents are enforceable and they meet all the requirements relating to signatures, including digital signatures and dispute resolution. And we can support this from end to end to ensure that every stage of this process is actually legally viable and enforceable. More importantly, I want to attract your attention to this guide which we recently produced just last week, which summarizes the requirements to electronic signatures. In supply chain finance, this is particularly important because you do not need to travel to the country to enter into enforceable contracts. You can use electronic signatures and they are fully recognized and work in Ukraine similarly to other countries. I would argue that sometimes it's even better in Ukraine than in other countries because the country shows resilience and many of the electronic services, including digital signatures, they operate on a wider scale than in other countries. That's very briefly from me. Also, another publication which we have, which is more extensive and provides free analysis of various sectors of Ukrainian business and how you can find opportunities in the country, investing in doing business in Ukraine. So if you have an opportunity, you can download it and spend some time on studying the environment of Ukraine and finding new opportunities. Thank you. And
Ihor, that was
to Ashley.
Thank you so much, Ihor. That was really excellent and very thorough. I wondered if you could possibly post those two publications in the chat so people can possibly download them if they wish, or maybe we'll just include it in the follow-up notes to everybody.
Yeah, no problem.
If I could just ask one or two little questions. I mean, is there a difference between the local, national, international courts, in terms of dispute resolution? I mean, are the national courts or the central courts better than, say, the local courts in Ukraine? Where should you go for dispute resolution? I know Yaroslav will cover this, but just your view on that.
My view is that Ukraine provides quite modern infrastructure for dispute resolution. You have national courts, the local judicial system, which is in which sometimes you have these notorious cases and which continues to be reformed, and the reform is not yet finished. In my opinion, it will probably take another 5 to 10 years to finish it. However, in the context of international business, it's not very often this is overstated, I would say, argument that the judicial system doesn't work, because you always can choose arbitration, you can choose foreign courts, you can choose other forums for dispute resolutions, and the Ukrainian law provides actual mechanisms how you can do this legally. And Yaroslav is actually specialist on these dispute resolution issues. And so, in terms of the scope of local courts, I would say they are obviously important as in any other country. But if you structure your relationships carefully, if you include these arbitrations of foreign dispute resolution authorities, then you can manage much better and even not rely very much on the Ukrainian judicial system.
Thank you. And sorry to ask so many questions, but how do you become an anchor? Who are the anchors? Maybe I missed that. Is it the big banks? Who is an anchor?
No, anchors in traditional supply chain finance, anchors, these are large corporates which are effectively sharing the credit rating with the suppliers. So, for example, if a Ukrainian supplier supplies to Amazon or to other big international name, then the receivables from such an international off-taker can actually be a reliable instrument, reliable collateral for securing financing. And even though, although the supplies are coming from Ukraine, but you are getting the financing on the back of these receivables from this international anchor.
Thank you. And one last question.
And IFC wants, in some relationships, they want to replace this international anchor with IFI like themselves, to ensure that these anchors, which may not have worked with Ukrainian suppliers before, that they get this advantage of having an IFI as a backstop for financing.
Thank you. And sorry, one more question. Sorry to dominate this. I noticed that things seem to be making a shift to much more transparent. Digital obviously is playing a role here. Are companies using blockchain to verify? Is there a lot of blockchain supply chain work going on?
We have a very active market in blockchain, and especially with stable coins and with Bitcoin. For smart contracts and similar instruments, I have not seen this lately very much applied in Ukraine for commercial relationship and in the supply chain, but it's probably only a question of time before this happens.
Thank you very much. Ihor, thank you so much. Very detailed, very knowledgeable, and very interesting. If I can now move on to Tony Chattin, who's the partner of MSS Global, and Tony deals much more of the granular detail of how you check out verifiable companies. Tony, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ashley, and thanks also to Alex and Ihor before. Yeah, we audit companies, including in Ukraine, across some of the most complex and high risk environments as well in the world, as well as the more benign. And that includes as a key part of that supply chain assurance. And we've heard on the finance side of things, but how do you then take that and practically as a company employ that? And there are certain benchmarks. How do you focus on managing the risks and priorities to what you're trying to achieve, and really then giving confidence to the financiers and to your clients that you are an asset to them, that you are going to give them something positive as opposed to presenting that risk? And you heard from Ihor about the anchor, the role of the anchor. Well, they're going to want to make sure that those suppliers are not presenting undue risk to them, at a practical level. And really, I would take that supply chain assurance, which is the core topic of this, and split it into two areas. First of all, the operational side of things. So at the operational level, how do you assure yourself of the integrity of your supply chain, the security of your supply chain, the custodianship of your supply chain? Do you take it just on the cheapest supplier, or do you look beyond that? And if so, in what sort of level? I'll take two examples, not Ukraine specific. One, highly publicized, were the pagers for Hezbollah in Lebanon. At some point, Mossad intercepted the custodianship of, during the manufacture and transport phases of those pagers to Hezbollah. Second one, at a far more practical level, and something that would be just as applicable in Ukraine, a transport company we were dealing with was servicing vehicles in a relatively complex environment. The company they were using to service the vehicles had swapped out OEM brake systems for grey imports. The next thing that happens, they start having road traffic accidents, road traffic crashes, because the integrity of the parts. So when you're looking at what you're trying to achieve and you're looking at those objectives, what supplier, how are you going to assure yourself that the constituent suppliers through that supply chain are giving you what you need to do? What sort of controls do you put in place to oversee them, not just initially, but then maintain that confidence, maintain that assurance? And there's certain international standards that can help you with that, particularly on the security side of things, custodianship of that supply chain as it moves through, such as an international standard ISO 28000, for example, on the security of the supply chain. So really on the operational side of things, how do you retain confidence in the integrity of your supply chain for you to then deliver your service or product to your clients, because you're holding all the risk that that supply chain is presenting to you? The next level then is, and it moves back towards the financial side of things, is more the reputational and legal side of things. And we've spoken briefly about bribery and the corruption side of things. And there's lots of policy papers on there. How do you, in practical terms, interpret that and apply it at a company level? And again, there are international standards, and indeed the Ukrainian government has embraced this in some levels. International standard ISO 37001 for anti-bribery in particular. What that allows you, and again, I look on the legal side of things potentially, is it gives you two different strategies. One, proactively, you're identifying the risk or down in your supply chain, you're doing due diligence on those third parties, procurement, and you're putting in place procurement and financial controls to minimize your exposure and your risk. And then you can take those same sorts of requirements, be that the International Standard Supply Chain Assurance 28000 or the anti-bribery, and actually put that, if you're an anchor or down in your supply chain to assure yourself of your own supply chain, you can put those as contractual practical requirements in those contracts to give you that greater certainty. So that's on the proactive side of things. On the reactive, the worst happens, at least you've done something. ignoring a potential obvious risk is not satisfactory. You should be putting practical systems, adequate procedures in place that you can then document and evidence quickly. And that also then allows the support of negotiations, remediation programs, etc., should the worst happen and there are allegations of bribery and corruption. So what I would say, ultimately, on the supply chain assurance at the practical level, there are straightforward processes in place already out there that if you're unsure of, you can draw on, and it will give you, at a company level and organizational level, help in putting the structures in place to minimize the risk that your supply chain that you're reliant on potentially poses to yourself. That's it, Ashley. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tony. Could I just say, how do you get your information? Do you do it through OSINT, through what's available there when you're checking people out? Or how do you delve into more deeper technical things? For example, someone might say they're on these registers, unless they might say, well, we've got ISO 37,000, but actually, how do you check there? What are the registers they can check on? And how can you find out about technical issues if people are, they might say that they're technically compliant, but they actually aren't? Do you delve into the phones themselves? How do you find out?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm just putting on the chat. There is a website there that if you are buying anything and you're a construction company, you're a manufacturing company and you want to build a new factory and you want that company to be certified to make sure it's health and safety, so ISO 45001 or anti-bribery ISO 37001, you can check that database. It is now, as of October last year, under an international hierarchy of that answers the simple question: who audits the auditors? Who says that an auditor is competent? And I'm not talking about financial auditor. I'm talking about auditing companies and how companies work, the processes, the procedures they place. In simple terms, use that website, type in the company's name. They may allege that they're certified for anti-bribery under ISO 37001. But it could have been just somebody jumping onto PowerPoint and generating a certificate. This is an international recognized due diligence tool. And when you click on that homepage, you will see further on down the page a ticker tape of increasing international companies. And we go back, Ihor mentioned Amazon, for example, or Ashley, it might have been yourself, mentioned Amazon. Amazon's on that list. How do they assure themselves that their suppliers are presenting less risk? So yes, that database at the most practical level, that database, if you're buying something and somebody's claiming that to be certified, check the database. If they're not on there, ask why. Simple terms. In terms of practical side of things, yeah, during an audit, we will audit the company, but we will also cross to the other side of the table as well and look at the links that they've got with other organizations as well and test the integrity of those links and controls.
Tony, thank you so much. I'm getting a really positive feeling about protecting risk here from all of the speakers so far. And increasingly, it feels like there are all sorts of checks and expertise that people can draw upon. So with that, I'm now going to go to Yaroslav Petrov from Asters. Yaroslav, are you here? I think you have a short presentation for us.
Yes.
And be looking at ESG type things.
I'm trying to put the presentation up. Just let me know if you can see it, because I have some problems with my Teams.
Okay, I think something's coming.
Yes. Okay, good.
It's up. Well done.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I actually would like to cover several topics, kind of aspects which are relevant to supply chain issues when you're dealing projects in Ukraine. And kind of a lot has been told already today, a lot of valuable comments from Ihor, Tony, and other participants. But reality is that kind of when we speak about ESG And do you see the next slide or not? Yes, it should be on the screen. So basically, ESG compliance. This topic is from one side, one can tell, okay, it is a war in Ukraine. What the ESG standards are you talking about? Especially such kind of comments you may hear from Ukrainian companies, because they kind of, fair to say, survive, and kind of many of them, they suffer and they try to get electricity for their production, etc. But reality is that kind of ESG is still on the table, and whenever you look into international financing, you will face the issues related to ESG, and there are expectations from international large lenders that companies which will be getting money, they will comply with ESG standards. And there are several examples. So, for example, kind of when EBRD has been given loans, there were specific requirements that basically you need to improve governance by improving procurement procedures. And basically, most of the procurement which has been funded by EBRD is done through quite transparent system for procurement Prozoro. So it was a requirement which is falling into the kind of criteria for ESG. Another aspect, there was also last year recent lending to Ukrainian state company Ukhrhydroenergo, and one of the requirements to get this financing was actually to improve equality regarding employment-related issues, improve trainings, equality, access to veterans, and etc. And basically, it was also another element which is falling into the ESG standard. Also, large private banks they have standards which they expect, and the Ukrainian banks they're also following these trends, and they're looking into the projects, and they put certain requirements. Actually, kind of in terms of where to get more information about this and what is expected from EBRD FC, they published a number of publications and guidance related what they expect in terms of ESG standards in Ukraine from your counterparts. Another aspect is, of course, to make sure that your counterparty knows about ESG. They try to be compliant, and if you have a counterpart in Ukraine which is compliant or they're doing something, they may be a preferred partner. Another aspect is that kind of lenders, so they sometimes understand that not every company is compliant and they need to do kind of something else. Basically, they may include this condition precedents for your financing that you should, as a company, perform some ESG related work. So it is important, and despite the war, it is kind of criteria which should be met, and you should remember about this. Another important aspect is anti-bribery. So there were some comments from Tony about this, and I wanted to highlight that you as a supplier, you should look into this from two angles. From a UK angle, where you are covered by UK Bribery Act, and also from a perspective of Ukrainian legislation. So basically, you should comply with both sides. And the UK Bribery Act has an extraterritorial effect, and everything what you do in Ukraine potentially can be covered by it. And you should remember that both giving and receiving bribes is illegal. You should also remember there is a specific rule of corporate offense that failure to provide bribery is offense, and you as a company should make sure that you provide training to your employees and guidance related to corruption. And all of the facilitation payments are prohibited as well. In Ukraine, there were some significant changes in terms of anti-corruption reforms during the last years, and there were special anti-corruption bodies established which are working. And last year they actually managed to discover several high-profile corruption scandals, and it is on one hand bad, but on the other hand we see that there are kind of enforcement agencies which can investigate and which can prevent corruption. And in terms of your supply chain issues, you should remember that while operating in Ukraine, sometimes you work with your agents, and you should make due diligence of your agents, understand that they should follow your company anti-corruption rules. They should follow anti-corruption legislation, because there have been instances when actually foreign companies have been prosecuted because the agent was accused of giving bribes. So it is important element to remember, and in both countries it is a criminal offense, and so it is kind of quite important. And a couple of words about dispute resolution. So just some basic stuff for you while operating in Ukraine. So we have just standard set of options for dispute resolution, like Ukrainian courts, which are functioning despite the war. A lot is done online, and so basically in this respect there are no kind of issues. But also international arbitration with opportunities to pass your case into International Commercial Arbitration Court and the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. It's good for smaller claims, or if you have a high-profile, large contract, it is better to send it to LCIA or ICC. It is possible to apply also English law for some contracts. And if your company is doing large investment, of course, you can be covered by BAT. Ukraine is also a member of New York Convention, which is helping to enforce arbitration awards internationally. Also important to remember that during martial law there are some limitations which also affect operations of companies, like related to some moratoriums on some enforcement against, in particular, like some state companies, also some currency control issues. But kind of you should remember as a company, kind of you have opportunity to include dispute resolution method, which is acceptable by your policies, and basically it is kind of working instrument. I also add one slide related to some materials which you can read afterwards. I found quite interesting guidance prepared by UK government. It is a little bit outdated from March 2024, but it is actually quite a helpful guide on explaining how to do business in Ukraine during the war, and it is covering a lot of important aspects which we mentioned today. There is also a study on ESG in Ukraine, also some guidance from EBRD ISC. So pretty much it from my side. If you have any questions, you can pass them in the Q&A chat. Thank you.
Yaroslav, thank you so much. Would you be able to post this in the chat so that people can possibly download it for the future? If not, we'll find a way to do that.
Yeah, for me it would be difficult because today I'm connecting on tablet. It's not very convenient. If you can edit, it would be helpful.
Okay, we'll find a way to do it. Thank you so much. Finally, last but not least, is Simon Cassey from Burns & Wilcox Insurance. And Simon, I'm particularly interested in your take on Alex's view of the 800 billion and the investments currently going on. So over to you as to how insurance can reduce supply chain assurance.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope we've got some time left. I've only got about 9 minutes, I think, before we go. But
yeah, we're a bit tight.
I'll just prance through the hedgerows of the complications of insurance as briefly as I can. Just to put supply chain insurance in perspective, it might be just a good idea just to quickly talk about what insurance would be available in Ukraine were there not a war. And not to go into too much detail about the intricacies of insurance from the point of view that a lot of insurers try to make life a lot more complicated, as we were talking about earlier, than it need be. But if there were no war in Ukraine, we would have land insurance, we would have insurance for fire, theft, windstorm, earthquake, etc., for infrastructure, energy, agriculture, housing, buildings, and manufacturing. For vessels, we would have hulls, machinery, and protection and indemnity, which would cover the vessels for liability. We would have a healthy market for travel and people going in and out of Ukraine. They would be insured for death and for accident. We would have insurance for trains, cars, aviation, basically general transport. And most relevantly to this discussion, there would be a healthy market for movement of goods, i.e. the supply chain operators. But putting the war hat on, and let's include terrorism and sabotage into this war definition. For anything that is static on land, war is not easy to find. Now, we're talking about large infrastructure projects, big factories, etc. The larger assets within the country are unfortunately uninsurable. That's not to say that there aren't smaller, more geographically, or should I say, less sensitive areas within Ukraine that would be insurable, and certainly assets such as agriculture as a static asset would be insurable. From the point of view that Russians tend not to bomb empty fields. Vessels are remarkably easy to insure within war. There's a very healthy market for war insurance on vessels going in and out of Odessa. Rates vary from 0.4 to 0.6%, depending on the activity of the Russian missiles and the Navy. People going in and out of Ukraine are very insurable. Again, they would be insured for death and accident. A lot of people are very worried about going to Ukraine. Of course, most of us who've been there know that it's actually nothing to be too concerned about. Transport, again, anything that moves is insurable. Trains, cars, not aeroplanes, because there aren't any, but if there were some, that would be actually quite difficult to insure. And then back to war on supply chain operators. Again, because those goods are moving, because they're difficult to hit for the Russians, then war is in fact quite insurable. Just briefly, the buyers of these supply chain insurances are understandably logistics companies, manufacturers, agriculture, and military as well. There are private investors, institutions such as MIGA, USDFC, EBRD, export credit agencies, and the Ukrainian government. But perhaps more interestingly to your audience will be the providers of this insurance. There are only a few syndicates in Lloyd's that will insure supply chain operators and cargo effectively. For what it's worth, their names are Amlin, ARC, Apollo, to name a few. There are schemes in Lloyd's run by K2 Rubicon, but a lot of these are purely for moving assets. You'll find the brokers will tell you all about how they're being very active in the Ukraine insurance market, and lots of of investors will find it easy to find insurance, but actually it is really only for these assets that are moving. The brokers involved are Marsh, Aon, Willis, McGill, me, of course, and most of these broker schemes are guaranteed by the donors themselves. For example, the EBRD project is guaranteed, appears to be insured, but actually it's guaranteed by the EBRD themselves. Somewhat similarly, the MEGA underwrite their own insurances as well. So there's not a great deal of risk transfer at the kind of level that maybe we could be talking about later on at $800 billion of assets. Now, just briefly, I think probably the opportunities for supply chain operators in Ukraine really depends on the operation, the finance. My advice to anybody looking to buy would be to find yourself a good international broker with a good cargo department. The limits of insurance are tiny compared to what is required to the extent of about $50 million of insurance, which really is not a great deal of liability. Prepare yourself for very high premiums. It's not cheap. A lot of people look at it and think, no, I know the risk better than myself. I'm not interested in buying and paying at this price. And like all insurances, I would advise everybody to make sure they read the exclusions in the policies that they're offering, because a lot of insurers will tell you that they're offering large, broader coverages, and they're all very competitive, but the devil's definitely in the detail. If you want to go on, if you'd like me to talk a little bit about this $800 million of $1 billion, I keep on saying million, $1 billion of capital available. I'm afraid that it's a lovely idea. It's very commendable. Everybody's getting very excited about it, but I'm afraid nothing really is going to happen until there is a lasting peace agreement. There will be small, maybe there'll be interest that will chip away at that 800 billion, but that 800 billion for a reconstruction and or renewal of the entire Ukrainian society isn't going to be touched until there is going to be a peace agreement. And in my own view, the only way to get to that peace agreement is to increase sanctions on the Russians, is to seize their sanctioned vessels, the shadow fleet that we all know about, and finance the Ukrainians with better arms, better quality kit, and effectively destroy the Russian army. That is the only way that I believe that 800 billion is going to get of any real use to the Ukrainians.
And on that note, Simon, thank you very much. Could I just go back to Alex on this? I mean, Alex, is there an element of the war has to stop? But you're implying there is money coming through at some level, at least on reconstruction level.
Yeah, no, look, and I very much agree with Simon, right? The real flows don't start until the security situation is resolved, right? And we see that. We see huge interest. We see people that are coming to the country now. I mean, I've been running Ukraine for 7 years now, much more interest than we ever had pre-war. But a lot of people, if you're a public company and you've got a board of directors and you have a fiduciary responsibility, it's hard to sell, coming into a war zone. That being said, we do see some people that are doing it now. It is smaller scale, but but we do see people do it, and there is very much going to be a first mover advantage here, right? People that do it now will reap outsized returns. And even if you're not going to pull the trigger now, coming in and making the connections and understanding the landscape and the opportunities, because there will be a rush when this does happen, that it will be very important to be on the ground and be prepared, because the opportunities will dry up.
Thank you, Alex. As we're kind of near the end, I think we've just gone slightly over. If everyone would like to make a final conversation, I mean, Alex, maybe that's yours. Maybe you want to say something about reassuring people about assurance, and then we'll move on to everybody one by one to see what their end feelings are, and then thoughts rather.
Yeah, look, I think, I think we've all talked about it. I think there's tremendous opportunities, there's complexity, there's challenges. The war is very much a reality and needs to be navigated, but we see more interest than ever, we see more opportunity than ever. And when this is over, again, not soon enough, but hopefully sometime soon, assuming we get a robust security situation, which again, we start to see coming together a little bit, not my area of expertise. There's going to be real opportunities, and definitely we are here to help companies come in and navigate this landscape.
Thank you, Alex. Ihor, would you like to finish with a thought?
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Ashley. I would say that although you see a lot of threatening headlines in Ukraine every day, and you see a lot of attacks, but in terms of business environment and how you can find opportunities, you can find regions in Ukraine, and you can find partners in Ukraine which are reliable and which can work seamlessly, even in such environment. And I would encourage everyone to consider Ukraine as a kind of extraordinary opportunity for investments and for opportunities, and to study the country, to study the opportunities. And I'm sure that in a few years, Ukraine will become the leader in this region. And the war, as some people say, war will end sooner or later. There is no other way.
Thank you, Ihor. And Tony.
Yeah, in simple terms, taking both what Alex said and Ihor said, the opportunities are out there. It's asking the right questions early, and getting a full understanding means that those opportunities can be best exploited. As Alex said, that first mover opportunity is really there, and the breadth of expertise in the UBBC provides potential to those opportunities just by going to experts like on this panel and broader to identify what questions you do need to ask and what sort of answers you should expect, and then how to put the systems in place to allow you to best exploit that as early as possible, because that way all of that simplicity will then just happen around you. Be the early mover and ask the right questions of the experts, really.
Thank you, Tony. Yaroslav, hello.
Yes, I would like to mention that the final remarks, just remember that, yes, some companies may be cautious and not ready to come to do projects at the moment, but it is clear. But you should remember that in Ukraine, there is a market which can support you. There are advisors like law firms, financial advisors, basically, which can be your gateway to Ukraine, and which can help you understand the environment, opportunities. Even without coming to Ukraine, you can get a representation of how you can operate, and you just should remember about this.
Thank you, Yaroslav. Sorry, I forgot to bring Steve Rowan in. Steve, are you there? Because I think you've got a comment to make on
I am.
Environmental audit. Just a couple of minutes. Sorry to. Steve, are you there?
No, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, Steve. Any comments from you from the environmental audit side of things?
Yeah, well, so I mean, really a few comments. I'll keep it very brief. I mean, the first thing I would say is, if you want to do business in Ukraine, go to Ukraine. Go now. Don't wait till the end of the conflict. Now is the time to be making the connections and the network and see for yourself and get involved in the business community. And as Simon said, it's really not a hardship posting in terms of visiting for business. It's a great place. So go make connections. I mean, there are numerous environmental and social risks associated with the supply chain, not only within Ukraine, but also, as the chain progresses from wherever the primary supply comes from. And you could do a whole seminar on those. But ultimately, I think, considering we're looking at probably the largest infrastructure program since World War II in Europe, the task is colossal. It covers every sector. From transport, utilities, water, power, district heating, renewables, etc. And in all of those sectors, there are opportunities. Within the environmental and social sector, there are risks and liabilities. And fundamentally, I think it comes down to competing needs between speed versus scrutiny. The Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian nation needs things done quickly. When the money becomes available, it needs to be building the power station quickly. It needs to be repairing the bridge or providing the sanitation, etc. The international finance institutions, they have their rules and their governance, and they have to be sure before they deploy money that the ESG landscape has been correctly assessed and that the risks and liabilities have been identified and measured. So that runs contrary to speed, because these large organizations tend to run slow, and it's quite hard to justify to a person subjected to minus 18-degree temperatures in Kiev why the power station needs to consider the migration of black stalks across Ukraine in the following spring. But the banks have to consider all these things. The people of Ukraine, they want things fixed and they want things improved, and they want to get back to where they should be. And I think ultimately the way to deal with this is to do a lot of preemptive work now. So there needs to be more development of institutional capacity within the competent authorities in Ukraine. There needs to be ongoing dialogue between the IFIs, the export credit agencies, and the Ukrainian customers. There needs to be general awareness raising within the supply chain, for example, within the Ukrainian supply chain, because another potential risk is that Ukrainian suppliers become displaced for foreign suppliers because they can't meet the standards, or they can't provide the right certification, or they can't meet the quality criteria. Well, a lot of that can be dealt with by awareness raising and networking and business to business communications and collaborations. And then finally, from an environmental point of view, a lot of time can be saved by strategic environmental assessment. So looking at large-scale infrastructure projects as a block, as a fleet of power stations, for example, where they need to be, what type of power station it needs to be. So look at a lot of the high-level ESG risks now. So when the projects come online, you can quickly drill down to the very site-specific issues. So that, I think that all of those things will help increase the fluidity of capital into the reconstruction program.
Thank you. Very succinct, Steve. Thanks very much. And Simon, one last comment from you, if you may.
Yeah, I think this is all very premature, to be honest. I really think that we need to be concentrating much more on giving the Ukrainians the tools to actually win their war. Otherwise, everything we've been talking about is pointless, because if the Russians invade Ukraine, then we're certainly not going to be giving them any money. So I'm really I feel obviously very strongly about victory, as so many of us do. But really, we should be giving these people money to actually win their war, because otherwise all this is pointless. On that matter, I discovered the other day that the Ukrainians are now inviting European defense or arms manufacturers to have their drones manufactured in Ukraine. The Ukrainians now have excess capacity in actually constructing and building drones. These people make the Chinese look lazy, and I really think that we should be giving them more money to win their war than worry about how much money we're going to make with them once this war is over.
Thank you, Simon. That's probably the comment of the year, I think, so far. Thank you to everybody. Alex McWorter from Citibank, Yaroslav Petrov from Asters, Tony Chattin from partner MSS, Ihor Olekhov from CMS Ukraine, Simon Cassey from Burns and Wilcox. And I'd like to thank everybody for listening in on this. It's a very important subject. Obviously, there's a slight divergence of opinions to who's going to win and when it's going to happen. But there is money and opportunity lurking. So from our point of view, stick with us in the Ukraine-Britain Business Council. We are there to prepare people to develop relationships with Ukrainians so that we have some first mover advantage, that relationships are established at an early stage. I think the moral of this is be prepared and source the people that know what they're doing, and you can easily navigate Ukraine. So with that, thank you very much. And I have another seminar on the 17th of February, all about HR and supply chains and virtual internships, which you could all probably help with. Thank you very much indeed. See you again.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Ashley.